All right, this is part one of my review of Psalm 63, verses 1 to 8. This is a passage that, along with the Lord's Prayer, sort of guides my prayer life in the mornings virtually every day. And it's just filled with important concepts to keep us on track in our faith. And it's a Psalm of David when he was in the desert of Judah, but as you'll see, it applies uh, to everything in life. And it starts off much like the Lord's Prayer does, focusing on God. In fact, it is a prayer. And literally it starts, God, you are my God. Now, the psalmist, of course, comes out of a polytheistic land where there were many gods to be worshipped. You could worship Baal if you wanted your crops to grow well. You could worship Chemosh or Molech, or you could worship the Ashtoreth, or you could worship the sun or the moon and the stars. There were no shortages of various gods to worship. But David starts off by saying, the God of Israel, Yahweh, he is going to be David's God. And we get up every day needing to make the same commitment and the same declaration because we live in a world filled with many gods vying for our attention. And your God, of course, is whatever you assign ultimate value to, whatever you are looking to make you happy and fulfilled in life. And of course, those gods are aplenty, be it career, hobbies, sex, money, politics, you name it. There's no shortage of things vying to give us the happiness and the fulfillment that our souls crave. And so each day it is helpful to go to the Lord and reaffirm our commitment. No, you are the one who is my ultimate satisfaction. You are my good, and I will seek you. And that, of course, is the next stanza that says, earnestly I seek you. And literally, that Hebrew word means early in the morning I seek you. The idea here is that serving God is what gets David up out of bed. That starts his day. He's so anxious to serve God that he gets up early in the morning so he can get started on serving the Lord. And here also we should ask ourselves, what gets us out of bed in the morning? What is it that inspires us to start a new day? And hopefully what it should be is the fact that, hey, each day we have a new day filled with new mercies and blessings from God and new opportunities to serve Him, to be part of His work on earth, building the kingdom of God. There's no higher calling, of course, to that. And that is what should energize our lives and should, in fact, get us up, get us out of bed and ready to go in the morning. Yeah, there are going to be some days we're going to want to sleep in. I get it. But if we find that we are not motivated to get out of bed in the morning and serve the Lord, well, we need to come back and pray this prayer some. Moving on, the psalmist says, I thirst for you, my whole being longs for you. And the Hebrew behind here literally says, my soul thirsts for you, my flesh longs for you. So my whole being, I guess, is a pretty good translation. But the idea is inside and outside, we long and thirst for God and for who He is, for His character, as we'll get into as we head down. And He's doing this in a dry and parched land where there is no water. Now, of course, literally when David wrote this, he was in a desert. So it's very tangible sort of thing, experiential sort of thing. But the fact that he talks about his soul thirsting for God clearly indicates that this is more than just a physical thirst. It is a spiritual thirst. And, it makes me think, of course, of Jesus and how He basically said that He was the source of living water. To the woman at the well, He said, if you drink of His water, the water that He gives, you will never thirst again. For of course our souls do long for God and can only find our true fulfillment in Him. And if we do seek after the things of this world instead, we give into the idolatry of our culture, it will leave us ultimately dry and empty. Yeah, it may satisfy for a little while. Of course, that's the great lie of sin. It always promises at least a temporary joy and satisfaction. But of course, it never lasts and leaves us feeling empty and dry. And so the cry of Jesus still rings out, "Come to me, receive the true living water in a dry and thirsty land." And that's what we want. That's what we should be thirsting after. Because if we're not filling our lives with God, what are we filling with it? What are we filling it with? Just a waste of nothing that will bring satisfaction. So this is verse 1, David crying out, affirming that Yahweh is his God, and declaring that he is that which is of ultimate importance to David. He's the reason David's getting up in the morning. It's what the thirst for him is what motivates him, even in the midst of very difficult circumstances. Then in verse 2, David says, "I have seen you in the sanctuary and beheld your power and glory." Now, of course, this could be talking about the tabernacle, which David had seen, of course. But this was before the temple, before there was any sort of sanctuary that would have been all that terribly impressive. So what might David be implying here? Well, of course, Solomon, when he's dedicating the temple a few years after this, talks about the fact that no building can hold God. He fills heaven and earth. And I'm sure being out in the desert, under the stars and in the mountains, God's sanctuary is his creation. In fact, Genesis 1 is often seen as really a bit of a parable about how God builds his temple in creation and then comes to inhabit that temple. So when he says, "I've seen you in the sanctuary," I kind of suspect he's thinking about seeing God in the grandeur of nature. And truly, this world is filled with the glory of God, and we can see him in all of the amazing sights and tastes and all of that which God has created. And so David says, "I've seen you in that sanctuary, and I've beheld your power and your glory." And as we think about God's power and glory, there are a couple of things that come to mind. The power, of course, is obvious in one sense, in that this universe contains power that we just can't even wrap our minds around. The power of a star burning, the power of a supernova exploding, the power of gravity in a black hole. These are things that we just can't even begin to conceive of how powerful these things are. And yet, I suspect that perhaps the greatest power that God has revealed to us is in the resurrection of his Son. For we can come up with scientific explanations for all of these powerful physical events, but to go from not being alive to being alive, that's power unlike anything that this universe knows. And it harkens back to God's name, "I am who I am, I will be who I will be." The one who is self-existent, has existence in and of himself, cannot be overpowered by anything, even death. So I often think of God's power most keenly represented in that resurrection of Jesus from the grave. And the glory, of course, the glory in the Old Testament, we're familiar with the Shekinah glory, the cloud that fills the temple. And of course, that is, in fact, very possibly what David is referring to. But in the New Testament, of course, that glory is found in his Son. And when Jesus spoke of his glory, what he almost inevitably was referring to was his death. because it was in his willingness to go to the cross that the love of God is most clearly seen. And there is nothing that demonstrates the glory of God more than the fact that he came here, became a man, and went to the cross, taking all the evil of this world upon himself for us. That kind of love is the essence of God's glory. And so when we understand that power and glory, verse 3 becomes very natural, because that love that God has demonstrated is better than life. My lips will glorify you. And of course that the Hebrew in this verse is really powerful, because the word love there, of course, is the classic Hebrew chesed, translated agape in the New Testament. It's that covenant love, that commitment love that God has for his people. And literally it says that love, that chesed, is good, is more good than life. And that word good harkens back to the Garden of Eden, the creation account, where God says it is good. And so you're getting this idea here that it is through this covenant love that God has for his people that Eden is reestablished. And there's nothing better than that. I mean, if you're united to the one who is life and the one who is love, what could be better? How could you exchange that glory for any other glory? And the answer, of course, if we're smart, we can't. That love is the only thing that fulfills. And so the only response is to say to God, hey, you are much more important than anything else in life. The love that you have demonstrated, the power that you have, and the love towards me is such that nothing else even comes close. And of course, Jesus illustrates that countless times in parables, whether